happy to be here among so many distinguished colleagues and being torn out of the rainiest city in Europe and the happiest country in the world to come to the beautiful city I know. So I'm very happy to be here. Yes, the title was a little bit provocative, and I did that on purpose because I'm going to talk about resilience engineering, which is going to tell you a little bit about a 45-year journey that I've taken in the safety field and where I am today. And during that 45 years, I've been involved with safety management systems. So I have an idea of what I think that they are and how they can be improved. My personal experience with safety management systems started in 1972 with my first flight in the United States Navy, and then the flight school, where I can remember in the first day, the crusty old fighter pilot came in with a cigar in his mouth and a flight jacket, and he said, "I want you to look at the person next to you. Within the next 20 years, one of you is going to be dead." And he was pretty close to being right. Within the next 15 years, I was in 4 different fighter squadrons. And during those, all of them had advanced safety management systems, by the way. We had 8 fatal accidents, 1 in each squadron, and 14 pilot fatalities just in the squadrons that I was in. Each one of those squadrons was very similar in some ways, but very different in other ways. And the ways they were different were in what I would call organizational culture and safety culture. Even though they were very similar, they were different. And all of them had won safety awards the year before the crash. And none of the crashes had a similar outcome. So why am I here? I was invited by Alan based upon a paper that I wrote called The Art of Measuring Nothing that I wrote during my PhD work, where I found it very difficult to find metrics to predict future events. And it started with the question, what is safety? And I just hope Eric Holnagel doesn't ask me what that is, because I can't define it. And I think a lot of us would have a hard time defining it as well. And then if you can't define it, how are you going to measure it? And that's one of the problems I think that we have with safety measurement systems. How do you measure safety? We know when it's unsafe, but we don't really know when it is safe. Went through many different theories on my long tour. Started with normal accident theory, which is very helpful, and organizational accident theory, and high reliability organization theory, which started on aircraft carriers in the United States Navy at the same time that I was flying on the East Coast of the United States. Some interesting things came out of those, but none of them really gave us good measures for safety management systems. Several things that I thought were interesting, though, were things like the effects of tight and loose coupling and how they affect results in organizations, the complexity and the human interactions and social technical systems, latent conditions that build up and drift over time, and finally, the ability of people to make sense out of their environments and to be mindful and to see things coming. I read the paper, The Paradox of Almost Totally Safe Transport Systems, and a bell went off. It's true. We're getting to the point where we're so safe, there's nothing to measure. So it's becoming very difficult for us to figure out where do we look to find new things. So nothing to measure, or subjective measurements, which we usually have, don't really tell us anything about the next event. And all the events I told you about, there was no indications that these were going to come. So it's impossible or very difficult to predict the next event that comes. So they come as surprises, or do they? To help myself figure this out, I looked at safety management systems as a process, and the original model did not have the environment. It was just the safety management system in the organization in 3 phases. And the important thing about this was I looked at the reactive phase, how we normally look at accidents and incidents, and tried to say that was not the place to focus, but instead on the interactive phase, to pick up the faint signals that are always available or always there prior to an event. Later on, I included the environment because the environment became very important. The regulators, society made great demands that influenced the internal workings of the organization. Jousting with Dragons came with a discussion I had with David Woods, one of the promoters of resilience engineering from 2006, together with Eric Holnagel. And it has to do with crossing organizational boundaries that lead to surprise. And it happens quite often. You have undesired outcomes that you didn't expect and you didn't anticipate. So how do we predict the next undesired event? Well, through resilience engineering, I think. It's a multidisciplinary theoretical approach to managing complex, dynamic, adaptive, social technical systems. It has to do with things like bounded rationality and the fact that we cannot possibly understand a system nor the way it will develop. And I also looked at things like safety 1 and safety 2, which is the old way of looking at safety. I'm waiting for the event to happen to study it and then fix the problem and go forward, to looking at why we do things correctly in the first place and go from there. Resilience, you can read those for yourself, but it's the ability of a system to absorb stress without breaking and return to some form of normal. So how can we get better effectiveness out of our current safety management systems? I think that a part of it is through resilience engineering and understanding the environment that we're working in. The fact that we're working in very complex, dynamic, adaptive systems that will continually change, that need to be changed in several different ways. They need to be structurally stronger, more robust. They need to be psychologically supported in many different areas, and they have to have social interactions that help to detect these different signals that are always present, to gauge the people who are actually doing the job in the interactive phase of the model. How do we do this? My first recommendation is get the leadership on board. The leadership is defined in all of your different safety management systems as the head of the organization. But are they really on board, and do they really understand the complexity of the systems that they're responsible for? And that starts with the understanding of the complexity of the system. And the limitations of the rules, regulations, and static procedures that we use to try to control these events. To move away from control-based or compliance-based organizations to more what I call relationship-based or performance-based organizations, which we have talked about, and to empower individuals on the floor to actually do the job and to see and detect the signals. So they're the ones who I think can capture the signals. But those are very soft metrics often. There's no hard metrics that we can look at. Some of the soft metrics that we use are cultural surveys, which I'm a culture proponent. Not that you can actually define it very explicitly, but you know that it's there because it is there. And then how this affects things like reporting mechanisms. We need to be able to let people do their job, know what to do, capture the signals, and then report when they see things happening. And then the system has to take that report and do something proactive with it. Unfortunately, in many cases, that doesn't happen. Anyway, that's the start. We can go from there.